Hello, welcome back to my studio, back to the channel. Today I want to do something just a bit different to what I normally do, which is music technology lessons. Today I want to take some of the things that I've covered in other videos, so just namely compression and EQ, some of the basics of mixing, and demonstrate for you how I'd use them in a basic drum mix. I'm not going to do anything fancy. This isn't the video where you're going to find tips and tricks to do all these crazy things with drums, and there are plenty of videos out there for that. What I'm looking to achieve using compression and EQ, and probably just a little bit of reverb as well, is create a really strong foundation, a really good starting point. Well, I'd say starting point is, a good drum mix can be half of your band, really, half of the mix in total. But a good, strong starting point that then creative elements you can put on top of that if you want to. So I have on my computer here, let me quickly flick over, a drum recording I did last year sometime for a band. It's pretty standard. I have overheads, kick drum mic, 2 snare mics. Drum had 2 toms, which he didn't hit that often, and I put a hi-hat mic on as well. And what I'm going to do is take you through how I would mix this. Again, just using fundamental, good, strong, basic principles. Right, let's have a listen to what we got, shall we? So first of all, we have, I'm working on headphones, so get my excuses out there early if this doesn't sound as good as I'd like it to be. Let's listen to our overheads. So that's quite a tight overhead sound. Really, my room can sound much bigger than that. I've selected an area where it's going to crash, and there's playing a ride there. Earlier on, just got hi-hats. This was recorded using a spaced pair, quite low, quite tight to the kit. It's got good sense of stereo image on it. Listen to where those crashes are. That one's on the left, that's on the right. So he's sort of it's recorded from audio's perspective as well, so his right hand is on the left of the mix. Have a kick drum. Which I realise now is actually, I've probably slightly processed that on the way in. I think that's been slightly compressed and EQ'd. That's kind of what I do when I'm working normally, rather than, so this wasn't recorded for this purpose, this is something I've dug out. So at that time I decided to put a bit of EQ and compression on the kick drum on the preamp channel strip I use, which is not something that I recommend for students learning. It's just that you're committing. If you're making mistakes, they stay forever. Something that as you get more experienced you can do, but there's still plenty to be done with that kick drum, so that's not complete by any means. Snare drum, highly likely I've done something similar. Snare top. It's quite spilly, quite a lot of ambient hi-hat noise on that. So what's it like in the crashes? Okay, that's going to be a bit difficult. Snare bottom. Getting a bit more definition from the snare bottom in terms of low spill, and what I normally do is phase reverse, which is really important. I normally phase reverse on the preamp on the way in, so this should be phase aligned. It is. You can just see that the first movement on each snare hit is a negative one, which means I've flipped the under snare to match the snare top. If you've not done that, or if you're using stems that you haven't recorded, make sure you check your under snare and phase reverse it. If you need to phase reverse it, you can probably process it somehow, or most plugins, especially EQ plugins, have a little phase reverse button that you can press. And I'll do that as early as you can in your chain, really. Then we have toms, tom 1. So the toms will hit at the same time, so it's probably a blend of both on in here. Okay, that's as a tom, bit boxy, bit mid-rangey, but that's what mixing's for. Floor tom. Sounds better again, large spill. I've obviously recorded, I mean, he's playing really hard, he's really crashing that crash, you know, so could have recorded those a bit closer, but I've gone for more complete sound by having the microphone slightly further away. Then there's a hi-hat mic, which doesn't sound like much, does it? It's but it can function. We can do something with that. I quite often end up not having hi-hat mics in my mix, even if I record them. I find the overhead normally does the job. But here, especially in this verse, that hi-hat is driving it, so I think it's important, so there's a good chance. I've already set up an auxiliary or an effects channel that I'm going to use for my snare reverb. S-verb is the way I write snare reverb, and then all of this is routed to a auxiliary drum bus, which I've already set up. You see with the toms that he doesn't hit the toms very often. He's hit it 3 times in a song, 3 moments in a song, so I've manually cut these, which I do over gating quite a bit. That was just a graphical glitch. Rather than gating toms, I will often choose to cut them, especially if there's not many in the song. If there's loads, then maybe I'll look for some way of doing it automatically. So, listening to these all together. All the volumes are level, all the pans are in the middle at the very beginning. Okay, let's get going. Let's start with the kick drum, which is my normal starting point. I'll choose somewhere he's playing the kick drum quite a lot. In the verses, he doesn't play it too much. This section will do. Let's have a listen. Okay. Right, so this is the plugin I usually use. So this is kind of like a channel strip plugin. It's got a compressor, a gate, and an EQ, and some filters built all into this plugin. I like using plugins like this for speed, but now I think about it, it's not very visual, is it? It'll get me the results I want, but I wonder whether it's not very clear. Tell you what I'll do. I'll try and use different plugins, because what I'm thinking is you want something with a bit more visual for showing this, really. Like a lot of people are used to plugins that have this sort of graph on it. So let's use this plugin. This, by the way, is a phase reverse button, circle with a line through it. So first thing I would do is look for EQ on the drums, and the most powerful thing you can do is create a scoop in the low mid range. As I bypass this on and off, you can hear just that one move. A move one dial makes such a big difference. But I'll just compensate that slightly. By boosting, that's too low. Oh, yeah, I don't like plugins that do that. That'll be that one. So I'm just adding a bit of a low shelf at the 100-ish. Compensate some of this. Can I make that steeper? Alright, so the shelf becomes a bell curve. What's that button? Okay. Doesn't give me too much control over the steepness of that. But I can tighten this up slightly. That should have an effect. There we go. And then a bit of top. So I like the idea that the kick drum hugs the mix. It's both kind of the lowest and the highest thing in any mix. A bit lower that frequency, get a bit more of that click in, which I normally find about 5, 7, 8K. So I'm just using a second point of EQ to create a bigger scoop. Okay, let's bypass this on and off. Okay, cool. So that's some really extreme EQing, really, some really big boosts, some really big cuts. But I find kick drum is often one of the most extreme EQs you would do. There's a option here to put a filter in, which I might just sync down 40 odd. Get rid of the real sub content, that's not particularly necessary. Okay, that would do until I can compress. So I would compress before in a plug-in chain, before we EQ is my normal way. What compressor shall I use? If you put your compressor after your EQ, you'll find that your EQ tweaks become more extreme because you stop hearing the volume boost that is built into the EQs or the volume drop that may happen if you cut a lot. So, and that's okay if you know it's happening. For me, compress first EQ. In terms of the order of the signal and the way I work, I kind of work backwards. I kind of work with EQ first because I think it makes compression easier to hear what I want when the EQ is already kind of in shape. So let's have a little listen to this compressor. This is a pretty regular compressor. It's got this analog which creates some sort of noise. I'll just turn that off. It's got normal controls, attack, release, ratio. It's got a parallel option, but let's keep this all wet, keep it simple. So it's already compressing. I'll compress a bit harder. So here, if you have a really short attack, you have that kind of slight trashy sound, and you get big, smooth, quick spikes. I like with my drums to be about 30 odd, mid-speed release, and then I'm going to compress it a bit harder, so we start seeing get near 6 gain reduction, a bit more ratio. So drums ratio somewhere, depending on the style, between 4 and 8. This is a slightly aggressive kind of thing, the way it's played. We're getting a bit of soft clipping, that's what that light is, but I'm okay with that. It being a vintage style compressor. So that sounds alright. Let's bypass it. So obviously there's a volume difference, a brute volume difference as well. Output this needs to be trimmed. You can see I'm really pushing it hot here. I'm going to trim that so I'll get a bit more control later. Bypass EQ. Nice, that's functioning. So we're steadying it out. We've made kind of a bitey, punchy. There's this punch dial, which I don't actually know what it does. Not a normal one you find on a compressor. Not sure I'm hearing much there, so let's ignore that. Right, then I would bring back in my overheads. And now I normally do overhead second. I don't know why, just over the over the years, shall we say, I've just kind of developed this way of getting the kick sounding solid and then trying to, because I don't like it when my drums sound too separated. I kind of like to have a bit of a sense of a real single instrument. Let's bring in that EQ again. What was that? Turn off that in order to hear the overheads. And with overheads, I have to do much more kind of search and destroy style EQing. So I just want a bit of brightness, get those cymbals clear. I'd normally have a high pass filter, get rid of like, be a bit more gentle. Snare's quite prominent, but that's okay. Listen for the cymbals. So we've got rid of that muddiness. I think there's some annoying frequencies in there, so I'm going to try and find and bust those. So I do that, I get a really narrow Q, give it a spike, and you see that coming up here. And we sort of sweep this, or this, till we find those frequencies annoying. I bet you about 3.5K. Bit above it. That's sort of annoying. It's an annoying noise, especially, I mean, this is really important when you start talking about the crash cymbal section. So we've cut that. We look for any more, a couple more, maybe there's like a boxy one down near 1. Yeah. So let's listen to that on bypass. Hear that 3.5K, cleaning that up. Yeah, that's okay. So let's bring back in the H compressor. So I always, within a drum kit, I'd always use the same compressor. I don't want to see a different compressor. If you've got multiple options on your plugin list on kick and on snare, well, actually potentially snare's the only exception, but on your fundamentals, when you're not trying to do anything too creative, you're just trying to make something strong, I like to have the same toned compressor and the same EQ, really, because you don't want too many mismatches in terms of the harmonics that these things are creating. They want to belong together. And you know what? It may not be like a real thing. It may just be the way I perceive it in my mind, but that's the way I do anyway. So let's put a bit of compression on these overheads. So using like a fast release, I get a bit more room and a bit more trash, kind of a bit more. Which for this style of drumming, I think is quite good. I just tame it down a little bit. I want to hear what it sounds like on just the hi-hat section earlier in the verses. It's just trimming off that snare, isn't it? You can hear this guitars and a vocalist. So there, the band was in the room, all playing this together. So a bit later on we get. So I can dial in that sense of room using that release. You know, a short release will bring a more room sound into the overheads. A long release would reduce that sense slightly. Yeah, that's working all right. Let's look at snares now. So again, EQ first for me. I don't know what this EQ is called. It's the BX Hybrid V2. Sure is. Let's get some snare. So, yeah, I'm immediately worried by the amount of crash cymbal, but normally you want a bit of brightness on top of a snare. Oh yeah, that. Quite a big boost, but I like the sound. Look to remove the bass that isn't really wanted, but you can add one snare, try and find that body, which is normally down around 200, 300. And then again, one of the most important things you can do is find and cut really where you don't want. Often that's about one. So that's a much improved snare sound, but I don't know how much that's going to be playing much role in my mix because of the huge nature of the spill. But let's have a little look, bring up H compressor. I'm just dialing this analog down to 0 because I think that's just a noise. It is, so no noise, thank you. So similar to kick drums really in my mind, same sort of levels. Compressing quite hard, slow attack, let it punch through. I want to see every single hit being compressed. So if I have a short release, we're going to expect an increase in spill, which obviously is not a great thing in this instance. A longer release should slightly get on that spill. That hi-hat is loud, isn't it? I'm going to go with quite a long release, but I think naturally I would normally do some sort of about here. That really hard one, just soft clipped here. Soft clipping's okay. So it's just a ding ring. I'm just going to want to try and tame slightly. Do I have a spare band here somewhere? I do have a spare band. Not doing anything. So I'm going to try and find that doom ring, which is down somewhere below 1,000, I think. Okay, let's see what we've got on the snare under. So I'm just going to start copying across our compressor settings now because they're going to have that a bit snappier because they'll give me a good starting point. So I'm going to come faster attack on this one. Let the punch come from the top and just let this ring a bit more. That means a shorter release, a faster attack, so we get a bit more of the sort of the tail crunch from this snare under. And I'm not a big one for gating, but I think what I might do is try and find a gate that works for these snares, especially the snare under. Because what I often do with my snare under is what's it called? Can't type it. BX. What is use that from the main of my reverb send, from the snare under as opposed to from the top. That means the reverb's more kind of top end crunchy noise rather than wallop. Depends, of course, on the actual song, but that's pretty much my standard go-to point. I'm just EQing now the snare under. It will pop. And I'm just going to take out that sort of stuff. I'm not too interested in finding the fundamental in this sound because it's to work in conjunction with this, you know. You'll find that quite often we'll be using the same kind of shapes, this boost, cut, boost, all over the shop on drums, and in fact on many instruments. Boost the fundamental, cut the mud in the middle, bit of shimmery top. So yeah, let's try and find a gate. Like I said, I don't often gate on my drums, and I know that's probably contrary to most engineers, but for me, I don't like the way, especially on snare, that when the gate opens you get a bit of a change in tone on the cymbals, on the hi-hat, and I know that's spill, and I know I could probably have mic'd it better and reduced the spill, but I didn't. So for me, I'd rather work with the spill and build it into my overall sound, rather than have a hi-hat that changes tone every time a snare hit, or a crash cymbal that it changes tone every time a snare hits. Anyway, I don't think that's going to be the case with this snare under, so I'm just going to put in this gate. Bit more release. Kick is triggering at the moment, isn't it? That's alright. The attack time is fast for a drum. You don't want to chop up the transient, but if you go too fast, you get some weird noises. Apparently you don't get some weird noises, but you often would. Like a little distortion type of glitchy noise. And let's see what happens if I put that gate on them over snare, just to see whether I'm wrong about how it sounds. Okay, so that's probably helping, really. We'll have to see what it sounds like whether the cymbals change. Okay, I'll eat my words in this instance, but I think my point stands that, generally speaking, I don't like to gate the over the top snare because I prefer the cymbals to remain consistent sounding. Right, now I'll be thinking about my reverb for the drums, because when I reverb my drums, I nearly always think of it as mainly as a snare reverb, just to sort of give a bit of length to that sound, because snares like naturally ring with an actual tone, and that's mostly undesirable in modern music production. So we actually gate and cut and reduce the tone, or record really dampened snares. So then we want to increase a bit of length using reverb. So I'm just going to bring in our reverb. I'm not going to think too hard about it. I would usually have a room for a snare, or a drum reverb, a short room. I'm just going to pick one kind of blind. I don't know what that sounds like, but it looks short. Normally quite a short room. I mean, you can have big spacey reverbs on your snares, but that's a creative effect for that mix, as opposed to what I'm trying to achieve here, which is kind of a bit more of a fundamental supporting style thing. So by all means, do longer reverbs if that's what works for your song. Let's have a little listen. So I've got a send here, bus 17, 18. I'm going to send the snare under to the bus. And for me, the snare under is kind of like the default. So I put that 0. The level of the reverb will be dictated by snare under. So that's a really tight, short room. Send a bit more to it, just because I'm not really getting the level I need to deal with that. Let's put a bit of top in as well. Okay, so that's really short. I might choose something just a bit longer than this one. As I said, I was choosing this without knowing drum setup. Okay, this seems promising. That's also short. But I think I just prefer that actually, marginally. Okay, cool. I'm going to keep that. I'd normally also just feed in a tiny bit of the overheads. I don't want to create that noise where you start sort of just creating extra harmonics and noise for the sake of it, but a little bit to help blend. And also because the overheads are lower, it sends lower because this is post fader send, so we'll go with that. We'll go with that then. Let's have a little look at our toms. So we've got some tom hits over here. I create a loop because he doesn't hit them often enough for me to play. So let's just listen to tom number 1, which is the higher pitched tom, the rack tom. Right. EQ, BX hybrid. I realise now that this plugin. So never mind, forget that. Right, okay. So similar to other drums, kick drum especially, this getting rid of your mid range is kind of key. Then you boost your bottom and boost your top. There we are. Take that off. That's pretty simple, isn't it? Off. Next one's on. Off again. On again. Nothing more complicated than that. Boost, cut, boost. Compressor, we're definitely going to want it compressed though. So we'll bring in our compressor. I said I've cut these, so I would at this point look at a gate as well if I were gating, but I've chosen to cut. Before I play it, I'm just going to set it roughly where I think, which is long attack. And I want these drums to be quite long tone, you know, so I'm going to have a quick release. I can get on top of that ring a bit by having a longer release. So let's have a look. Bit more there. Want it to hit hard. Nice, I quite like that. And send a reverb. So one thing you should check is that your reverb, if it's got a pan option, matches the pan on your drums. So on Pro Tools there's a button which does this automatically, which I normally have on, but just make sure it matches. So when it goes in the reverb, it's in the correct space inside a stereo reverb, and you don't have a dry here and sort of the reverb somewhere unnatural. So I'm going to put the pan on these drums. I said earlier this was recorded from an audience perspective. That means the floor tom is on the left and the rack tom slightly on the right. Or realistically it's actually in front of the drummer, but bit of balance. I will move over, copy and paste the EQ and compression settings onto the next floor tom. I'd expect the EQ to want to be slightly different. some high pass filter. Get rid of the worst of that. Then together. Not the best tuned drums in the world, are they? Let's see what it sounds like in some context. Run back a couple bars. Few bars. So I think I can just do a little bit more reverb, try and increase the tail on these toms. Want it to be a power moment, you know. Excellent. Okay, let's look at this hi-hat mic, which I'm not sure about at all. I mean, it kind of sounds complete without it. Just a bit of brightness, I guess, could happen there. Oh, that's quiet. So, yeah, EQ. What's it called? There it is. Just top. Just... and then get rid of a lot of the bottom, like a lot. And there's some annoying noises, so it might be a bit of search and destroy to do. But it's the same, 3.5K. Just try and smooth the sound out. One. And then could compress everything. I don't know what it's called. I don't know what anything's called anymore. I've got far too many plugins. I've loaded up the wrong thing. It's called H-Delay, H-Comp. Well, I'm going to get quite on top of this with quite a short attack, quite a fast release. Just try and get on top of this sound. I want to kind of get on top of that snare mainly. That kind of works. And then if I fade that in with the overheads. Yeah, it's just giving a bit of sense of place. Center the reverb slightly. So one thing that we're going to have to bear in mind with this this hi-hat mic is, what does it sound like when the crashes are playing? I mean, it's okay. There's a frequency in that's a bit annoying, but I think we might be a matter of later in the mix I'd be muting or cutting when the hi-hat isn't playing. Say here, and then that'll go, so we wouldn't worry too much about it. Nice. Then we'll keep that there. Keen to move on. Then we'll look at the bus, because I would always do a little bit of compression and EQ on the bus. Just brings a sense of cohesion to the whole drum sound. It helps him sound less like a like separate instruments and more like one instrument together. So attack times and release times are approximately the same we've been using all along. And we just want to see these probably lesser compressor levels than we have on the close mics, maybe 3 dB. Just letting that constantly work a little bit. We'll bypass this a few times. mean, just brings tightness, togetherness. And then I'd normally have a little bit of EQ. And what this EQ, I nearly always set it to do, is just a little bit of bass increase and a little bit of top increase, brightness increase at the top. Just brings the drums forward in the mix. Bypass this. Bring it back. And then, you know, you might end up doing a bit of seek and destroy if anything's been annoying. On the overall sound. Tone come in and out when I'm sort of been finding it. We'll do the same again, shall we? Okay. How's this sound? What I can do now is bypass everything in the mix. So that's our original recording. There's levels and pounds, which we didn't have before, and a bit of gate, but we'll ignore those. Bring in the compressors. All the punch, all the power. Now we're bringing the EQs to clean it up. I mean, obviously it's a lot louder when the compressors are in. I don't deliberately use compressors to increase the volume, but it's a consequence, really, isn't it, of compressing so much. So, yeah, that's all right. I'm pretty pleased with that, considering I was using plugins that I've not really used before. But the principles are all there and all the same, no matter which plugins I use. It's the same idea of that natural EQ curve, or having a sort of boost, cut, boost. Compression is quite hard, I think, on drums. This is a really rock-heavy played track. You can go much gentler than I have done, depending on the style of music you're working with. And by gentle, I mean reduced ratios and sort of reduced thresholds. These weren't insane attack and release times. These were pretty standard. So the aggression that I put in that are mainly in sort of low thresholds and high ratios. Excuse me. Okay. So, hope that was a good watch. It's it's been 43 minutes now, but that's okay for getting the basics, what could be half of your mix down and basically there. I wouldn't expect this to, in a full mix, we're going to move on, I wouldn't expect this to be untouched. I would review these EQ placements slightly, especially the notches for harmonics that become annoying when you start introducing bass and looking for masking between bass and a kick. But this is a solid place for any mix to be going forward from. So thanks for watching. I hope that was worth your 3/4 of an hour. And yeah, I'll see you next time.